Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GCSE science teacher. In today's video, we're going to be learning about different atmospheric pollutants and the different activities that humans do on a societal global scale that actually have a big impact on the amount of these pollutants that are released into our environment. And therefore, we're going to explore the different impacts this has on our health, but also on the environment itself. So if you do enjoy this video and you find it helpful, let me know by subscribing, joining our community, liking the video and sharing it as well. And can I just say thank you so much to everyone who has done that. I really am very, very grateful and I appreciate every single one of you guys here. So I'm quite blown away actually with how many of you there are. So thank you so much. It's quite a daunting thing. I'm usually teaching classes of 30 at a time, 32, 35, something like this. So to have, over 800 of you guys listening and watching this, it is just mind blowing. So thank you so much. And yeah, if this is helpful to you, do let me know. I always like hearing from you guys. So let's talk about this video and what we're actually learning about today, because there are a few things that they want you to know in terms of human activities at GCSE. So let's talk about the first one is rice farming. This is a process where essentially rice is farmed. It's a type of plant. It's a crop that is grown on a mass scale. And as a result, there are impacts of this. So things like transportation in cars and vehicles and all of that kind of thing, of course, release carbon emissions, but also it releases methane as well, because it's actually grown in what we call a paddy field. And this is kind of like a swampish sort of waterlogged part of the planet, which essentially helps the rice grow. It's like how they like to grow these crops. But it does release a lot of methane as a result. Another thing that releases a lot of methane are cows or cattle farming. And again, these are a big sources of a lot of people's diet, especially in the Western world. And this can have a big impact on the globe because, of course, these sorts of animals are used all the time for things like fast food and just general food products, the dairy industry and things like that. So very much a big part of the global economic infrastructure. And of course, it has a big impact on the planet. So both of these do release methane. Methane, by the way, is considered a greenhouse gas because it can trap the sun's radiation. We did talk about that in a previous video, so I'll link it for you if you've not seen it. And it is a hydrocarbon because it's only made of carbon and hydrogen. The symbol for it, or the formula, is CH4. Another sort of thing that releases methane is landfills. And we obviously don't really want to think of this as a human activity. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun because it really isn't. A landfill is just an area of space where all the rubbish that can't be recycled or reused is just dumped and left to break down over time. Now, actually, unfortunately, a lot of it doesn't break down over time. We know this because a lot of plastics and things like that just don't break down and biodegrade naturally. So that's why there's been a big push in, the manufacturing industry to actually cause a lot of the products that are being sold at the minute to be changed so we can recycle them, so we can reuse them. And that's what's happening in a lot of walks of life. So in the beauty community, in the food companies that we think and see, all the packaging that we see nowadays, we're starting to change our habits, even things like carrier bags. I'm currently in the UK, and I remember there was a time where you'd just be given a free plastic bag every time you went shopping. But nowadays, you bring your own bags. And that's a thing as a society we've started to change and improve upon, which is obviously going to help impact our planet in a positive way. Another thing as well is this idea of deforestation. So deforestation, this idea of cutting down trees. Why do we do that? Well, with the population increase, the boom in human sort of growth as a population, we obviously need more resources. We also need more housing. We need more space to grow crops for food and space for farming. So a lot of the trees that are naturally occurring, a lot of that biodiversity is starting to be diminished. And if you look at places like the Amazon rainforest, you'll actually see and notice that they're starting to cut back a lot of the green spaces on Earth to kind of help us as a society build out our own population. With that, obviously, that means there's less plants and that means there's less photosynthesis. So not only does our air quality reduce because there's less oxygen that's being produced by the plants, but also less carbon is being captured by the plants. Remember, plants absorb CO2, and that carbon dioxide, if it doesn't get absorbed by plants, it just kind of accumulates in the environment. And carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, so it also contributes to this idea of the greenhouse effect, which I'll talk about in a moment. And also, carbon dioxide is also released from cars, lorries, vans, aeroplanes, all of that kind of thing that transport us around from A to B, but also in power stations as well, or power plants. And this is to help generate that electricity that all of us use nowadays for all of our devices, charging them every day and using the electricity to turn on lights, etc., etc. So pretty much everything we do has an impact on us. And we're going to talk about the different pollutants you may not have heard of in terms of carbon particulates, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, as well as those greenhouse gases you may be more familiar with. So I hope you do find this helpful. So, as a bit of a recap, remember the greenhouse effect is essentially the accumulation of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere that traps the sun's radiation. And this essentially, these greenhouse gases act as an insulated layer. Now, in small quantities, in a small concentration, this is amazing because it keeps our temperature on Earth a nice Goldilocks zone. We have this beautiful environment that is maintained. However, if we have too many of these greenhouse gases accumulating in our atmosphere, that means more of the sun's radiation is trapped, and therefore the temperature on Earth increases. Now, some of us will be thinking, well, that's brilliant. I love the temperature to be warm, fantastic. However, it actually over time has caused a lot of big problems, such as polar ice caps to melt, and therefore sea rises rising, sea levels rising. It also causes things like habitat change and different migration patterns of birds if the winters and summers are affected. This is not the same, by the way, as weather. So climate change and weather are not quite the same thing. Weather is more of a day-to-day change that you see. So it's sunny, then it's cloudy, it's raining, that kind of thing. Climate change is looking at data across decades and a large chunk of time and seeing that actually over time, we normally have winter lasting this much time, but now it's lasting this much time. And the same with summer. And how we are seeing that a lot of our temperatures on Earth are much higher than they've ever been. And this is because of those different greenhouse gases, the water vapor, the carbon dioxide, the methane, that have essentially built up over time. And that's because of those human activities we just discussed. And I'm going to talk about a few more reactions that link to this topic. So this is the reaction I'm talking about. It's combustion. So combustion of fuels, essentially this is meaning the burning of fuels. That's what combustion is. Complete combustion and incomplete combustion both release several chemicals, several gases and particles that essentially cause different effects on the environment. So let's start with complete combustion. This is when a hydrocarbon, different fuels that contain hydrogen and carbon, they react with oxygen in a plentiful supply. And as a result, we have carbon dioxide that forms a greenhouse gas, and also water can be in a vaporous form, and this is a greenhouse gas as well. So both of those have an impact in terms of the greenhouse effect. However, incomplete combustion, when there isn't enough oxygen that burns those hydrocarbons, we actually end up with carbon monoxide. And one of the ways you can remember this is because incomplete combustion is incomplete. It doesn't have enough oxygen, which means you form carbon monoxide, mono meaning one, whereas dioxide, it's carbon dioxide, that's CO2. You've got enough oxygen, that's why you have O2. But carbon monoxide is very dangerous, and it is a pollutant because it's toxic to us. It actually has a high affinity to our hemoglobin, a protein found in our red blood cells that helps carry oxygen around the body. And what happens is if we have too much carbon monoxide being inhaled, it actually stops oxygen binding to that hemoglobin. So we start to feel fatigued, we start to feel lethargic, we're not getting enough oxygen to our working cells and our muscles, and this can cause a reduction in respiration, that breakdown of glucose to release energy. Now, our body functions with energy, we need energy all the time. And if we're not getting enough oxygen because of that carbon monoxide, it can be actually fatal, which is why carbon monoxide alarms in homes are often installed to prevent this, because carbon dioxide is an odorless gas, it's a colorless gas, and we can't detect it unless we have devices to do that for us. So that's a big pollutant there. We also have carbon that forms in incomplete combustion. And carbon, you may have seen in the term soot or carbon particulates. And this has a big impact in terms of global dimming, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk about global dimming. I know I mentioned about carbon particulates and soot and how this affects the planet in terms of global dimming, but what actually is it? So this image you can see here, this is showing a skyline of a city. And what's happened is the particles in the atmosphere, that pollution that's built up, has formed something called smog. Now, smog stands for smoky fog, and it's caused by these carbon particulates that have essentially built up in our environment. And this is when we burn hydrocarbons, they've not fully burnt in that incomplete combustion reaction. And essentially what happens is if we breathe this in, we start to develop respiratory problems. So it can actually affect and irritate our airways. So conditions like asthma and bronchitis, both of those can develop over time. And lots of people require inhalers for the treatment of these conditions because it can narrow our airways. Global dimming itself is caused by this smog, caused by those carbon particulates. But global dimming essentially is what it sounds like. The environment is dimmed, the light intensity is reduced. And as a result, this can impact not only our health, but also the photosynthetic organisms like plants. So if there's less light, there'll be less photosynthesis. So less carbon is captured, less oxygen is released. So our pollution essentially is not only building up, but it's not getting better either. So all of these things have a big impact and kind of work synonymously with each other, which is why it's so devastating. So nitrogen oxide is another type of pollutant that you should be aware of. And although nitrogen is not found in fossil fuels when we burn fuels, it's actually found in the case of car engines. And you need to know that the nitrogen comes from the atmosphere itself. Remember, around 78% of the atmosphere is made of nitrogen. So when we burn those fuels in a car engine, the high temperatures and pressures in those engines can actually cause the nitrogen and oxygen in the atmosphere to react together and form those nitrogen oxides. And essentially those nitrogen oxide, the NOx, that's the general formula for it. We can have nitrogen monoxide or nitrogen dioxide. these are kind of grouped as nitrogen oxides. That's what the X stands for. It depends on how many oxygens there are. It can lead to things like smog. It can lead to things like asthma attacks, which is why actually a lot of governments and official parties that run the society we live in, they've actually started to put on like a green tax, or kind of reducing the global emissions from cars. And that's why there's a big push at the moment for electric vehicles, because they don't release as many toxic gases such as this. So a lot of these pollutants, they are aware of them in society. We're trying to change our habits as a society as well to improve the environment that we're in. And this is one of those key examples. Now, another impact that we see due to pollution is what we call acid rain. And we often see this in the form of erosion of buildings and marble statues. We might see it in the reduction of aquatic life, so death to fish, death to plants in rivers and lakes. And this is because acid rain acidifies those structures or those areas in the environment. And how does this form? Well, it's because there is something called sulfur, which is found inside fossil fuels, so coal, oil, and natural gas. And when they're burnt, they release that sulfur into the atmosphere. Those impurities are broken down, and this reacts with the oxygen. And when that reaction occurs, we end up with a gas called sulfur dioxide, sulfur trioxide as well, depending on how much oxygen there is. And essentially, both of these gases will react with water in the air, so water vapor. And when that vapor condenses and cools, it will form sulfuric acid, H2SO4. And that sulfuric acid is exactly what it sounds like. It's that acid rain. And this, like I said, can damage the environment in a multitude of ways. And that's it from me today. I've been the GCSE science teacher, and you have been curious. If you did enjoy this video, please do let me know by giving the video a thumbs up, share it with someone else, and do subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.